She chose duty over me. Now the alien queen wants me back in her bed. He steps through the blast-scarred entrance, blood pounding in his ears, knuckles already flexing in that unconscious habit of his. The corridor beyond smells of smoke and scorched metal, a testament to the desperate firefight that ended only moments ago. Adrenaline hasn't left his veins yet. He can feel it surging, making his breath come faster. His name is Rylan, and he's ready for another round of whatever this God's-forsaken station wants to throw at him. He barely has time to process. The screech of metal behind him before he whips around, pistol in hand. His heart jolts in his chest, and for a beat he thinks it might be an enemy, but the figure that emerges from the thinning smoke makes him freeze. Tall, graceful in a way that defies every natural law he's familiar with, and impossibly alluring. Her skin has that eerie, luminous quality he remembers too well, an icy blue tone that darkens or brightens with each shifting emotion. Her eyes are narrowed now, swirling with violet and blue. She's dressed in something regal, a smooth, flowing garment in deep sapphire that shimmers around her like a living aura. The sight of her hammers a spike of fury and desire right into his gut. Kael'ari, he clenches his jaw. There's so much to say, so many accusations to hurl. She chose duty over him, left him stranded on an outpost world, while she ascended to her throne. He'd told himself he was over it, over her, but the sudden thunder of his pulse betrays him. Her gaze locks onto him, and he sees the flicker of conflict in those shifting eyes. He doesn't lower his pistol, even when she steps forward. She's always moved like a warrior trying to hide behind regal composure, but Rylan can see every bit of that lethal grace in the subtle tension of her shoulders. She could strike just as fast as he can. Memory slams into him, bodies pressed together on a war-torn planet, the taste of her lips laced with the heat of battle. He remembers what it felt like to crave her so strongly it eclipsed his senses. But now he just wants to keep the upper hand. She says his name in a low voice that resonates in the smoky corridor. Rylan. His heart squeezes at the sound. He hates that she can do that to him. He refuses to blink. What do you want? Her gaze skates over him, taking in the new scars, the slight limp he's developed from a previous mission that went south, the tension in his muscles that never truly relaxes. Your help, she says. He notices how she keeps her tone calm, but there's a subtle tightness to it, like she's struggling not to let something else bleed through. He almost laughs. You need me? After everything, after shattering what they had and leaving him to pick up the pieces of his life, she's back with that softly spoken request. Right. I don't take orders from you anymore. Find some other merc to do your dirty work. Anger sparks across her luminous skin, brightening it for a flash. She steps closer. If you'd rather I let half the galaxy burn just to spare. Your pride, then, by all means. She can't finish before they both sense movement at the far end of the corridor. Instinct overtakes them. Rylan pivots, raising his pistol. She shifts beside him, her posture fluid as a whip. Figures emerge from the drifting smoke. A squad of heavily armed soldiers wearing armor Rylan doesn't recognize. He's not sure if they're after him or Kael'ari, but it doesn't matter. Adrenaline sears through him again, and he braces for a fight. The soldiers open fire. Bullets ricochet off the walls, sparking against the metal. Rylan ducks behind. A toppled column, Kael'ari fluidly sliding beside him, her breath short and sharp. He risks a quick glance into her eyes and sees her fury mirrored in swirling streaks of violet. Then they move in tandem, muscle memory from old missions igniting. In a flash, Rylan is lethal at close range. He doesn't hesitate as he dashes forward to close the distance, gun spitting bullets with trained precision. One soldier goes down, then another. Kael'ari sprints in a graceful arc on the other side, her movements almost too fast for him to track. He sees a burst of her own brand of power, a flicker of crackling energy around her fingertips that sends one attacker sprawling against the bulkhead. She's always had that advantage. an alien physiology honed through centuries of selective breeding among her people. It made her a queen, and it makes her unstoppable in battle. They don't have time for questions, not in the thick of it. Rylan's world narrows to muzzle flashes and the thunder of weapons discharging. A soldier lunges at him with a blade. Rylan sidesteps, cracks his knuckles mid-move, and drives a fist into the man's face. The blow resonates through his bones. A second blade carves toward his ribs, but Kael'ari intercepts. She steps in, grabs the attacker's wrist, and slams him into the floor with unnerving ease. When the last soldier collapses, the corridor is quiet again, except for the buzz of shorted-out wiring and the ragged push of their breathing. Rylan straightens, chest heaving. He sees that Kael'ari's arms are spattered with someone else's. Blood, her sapphire gown torn at the hip. He can't decide if the sight is terrifying or excruciatingly tempting. He remembers what she felt like in his arms, the electric pulse of her alien form pressing against his scarred body. He bites back every conflicted thought. Who the hell were they? She glances at the bodies, jaw set tight. Dissidents from my court. I've lost some control back home. It doesn't surprise him. Power always comes with a price, especially for someone like her, whose empire spans multiple star systems. He feels an unexpected swirl of protectiveness that he tries to quash. So you're being hunted by your own people. Fantastic. She turns those shifting eyes on him, and he can almost taste the tension in the air. You were always the best operative I knew. I need you, Rylan. If not, for me, then for the billions who will suffer if my throne is usurped by those men's masters. It's the same argument she used to end things with him before, her duty over their bond. He wants to be furious, but he sees a flicker of desperation in her expression, something real. He flicks his gaze down the corridor. More enemies could be closing in. He exhales, wishing he could slam a fist into the wall. Fine, on my terms. I'm not taking orders like a soldier. And if you stab me in the back again... A flicker in her eyes, regret maybe. I won't. He jerks his head forward. Then let's get off this station before the next wave hits. They move quickly, ignoring the corpses left in their wake. Neither of them voices the pull that crackles between them. Every breath Rylan takes seems to carry her scent. A subtle mix of exotic spice that he's never forgotten, no matter how hard he tried. The air is thick with tension, but they keep it contained, unspoken, as they navigate the flickering corridors. Finally, they find an exit hatch leading to a docking bay. Kael'ari halts at the threshold, pressing a palm to the console. Her skin glows faintly against the panel, a sign of her alien biology interfacing with the system. The door slides open with a hiss. On the other side, a small craft waits in a private hangar bay. Rylan notices the blast marks on its hull, the flickering lights in the docking area. Clearly the fighting hasn't been isolated to just one corridor. They dash across the bay. She enters a code on the ship's access panel, and the ramp lowers. He scans the shadows for movement, chest still tight. When they're both inside, the door seals. Only then do they allow themselves a moment to breathe. He leans against the wall, letting his head tip back. Pain flares in his side. One of the soldiers must have grazed him. He presses a hand there, feeling dampness. Great, another scar for his collection. He glances over to see her staring at him, her eyes darker than before. You're hurt, she says softly. It's nothing. Her lips part, but she hesitates, then steps closer. He fights the urge to tense up. Despite everything, she's still the best medic he knows. She glides her palm over the bruise at his side, and even through the fabric of his shirt. Her touch radiates a soothing warmth. That subtle glow in her skin intensifies, as if her body is responding to the act of contact. His breath catches. You still do that healing trick? He murmurs, trying to keep his voice steady. She nods, focusing on the wound. I never stopped. He forces himself to hold still while the warmth spreads, a gentle hum of energy knitting the torn flesh beneath. Then, unbidden, memories rush at him. Her hands on his bare chest in a makeshift tent on a war-torn planet, the hush of her voice as she soothed his pain, that same comforting glow illuminating their embrace. He clears his throat when she finishes, and she draws her hand back, like she's afraid of the contact. A tension pulses between them. He can see her own memories flickering in her gaze. This close, he can't ignore the curve of her lips, the way her eyes shift color, hinting at some emotional swirl she's trying to bury. He reminds himself that she chose her empire first, that she walked away. But this moment is so thick with the echoes of a shared past that he struggles to keep the wall around his heart. "We should get this ship off the station," he says, stepping back before he does something reckless. She nods, turning toward the cockpit. He follows, watching the way her gown flows behind her, how her shoulders tense with unspoken turmoil. When they reach the pilot's seat, she slides in, flicking several switches on the control panel. Rylan stands behind her, arms crossed. The engines rumble to life, vibrations coursing through the deck plates. He can't help but admire her competence. She's not just some figurehead. She knows how to fly, how to fight, how to rule, and it ignites something in him he can't smother. The ship lifts off. Through the viewport he sees the docking clamps release and the star-streaked void of space open up before them. She angles the craft away from the station, weaving between chunks of debris from previous battles, eyes narrowed in concentration. Rylan keeps an eye on the sensors. A couple of smaller fighters are circling, but Kael'ari's skill at the helm threads them through. Soon they shoot into the dark, leaving the station behind. When the immediate threat has passed, she sets a course and engages autopilot. For a few seconds, neither speaks. Then she stands, turning to face him. Her gaze flicks to the wound. On his side, now mostly healed thanks to her touch. He doesn't know what to say, so he keeps his silence, letting the engine's hum fill the space. Finally she exhales. Moving past him into the corridor that leads to the rear of the ship, he trails after her, not sure why he's following but unable to stop himself. They enter a small cabin area, 2 bunks, a cramped table, and a flickering overhead light. Kael'ari checks the corners, scanning for damage or sabotage. He steps in beside her, so close he can feel the heat radiating off her body. "What now?" he asks, voice rough. She rubs a thumb over her lower lip, that small, unconscious gesture he remembers. "We can't do this alone. My empire is in chaos. I have loyalists, but I need someone I can trust to move in the shadows, to strike the heart of the rebellion. And you think you can trust me?" His tone is harsh, but her expression softens, just a fraction. "I never stopped trusting you, Rylan." She lifts her eyes to his, and he sees something raw in them. Anger and need collide in his chest. "You sure? Because you had a funny way of showing it back then. One day we were planning a future, the next you vanished to sit on your throne." The color in her skin brightens at the accusation. "It wasn't that simple." He scoffs. "It's never simple, is it? But this time you come crawling back, telling me you need me." He steps closer, pinning her with his gaze. "Don't think I'm just going to fall at your feet again." She raises her chin, that regal defiance rearing up. "I'm not asking you to. We either stand together now, or the Empire and everyone in it burns, including you." He wants to push her, demand an apology that will never fix what broke. But a distant alarm pings from the cockpit. He clenches his jaw and turns away, ignoring the electric pull of her presence. "We've got company," he mutters, heading back to check the sensors. Sure enough, 2 fighter blips have locked. Onto their position, he braces for combat. Kael'ari slides into the seat beside him, hands dancing over the controls with expert precision. The thrusters roar, and they veer off, jolting both of them in their seats. "Hang on!" she warns, and the ship plunges into a spiraling dive that sends Rylan's stomach into his throat. He grits his teeth, aiming the turret controls at the pursuing fighters. His targeting reticle sweeps the starfield. The first enemy craft streaks by, blasting green energy bolts. Kael'ari twists the ship sideways with an engine roar, letting Rylan snap off 2 well-timed shots. The fighter erupts in a ball of flame. One down. The second fighter is more elusive, darting behind them with surgical precision. He can feel the hull shudder under the hail of laser fire. Kael'ari curses under her breath, her voice dipping into that dangerous purr that signals her frustration. Rylan scans for an opening, nearly slamming the turret trigger as the second craft lines up a shot. A barrage of laser fire sizzles across their shields, sending sparks showering inside the cockpit. Kael'ari pulls a sharp, evasive maneuver, thrusters screaming. Rylan grips the turret, waiting for the perfect angle. There, he squeezes the trigger, unleashing a streak of bolts that rip across the fighter's cockpit. It detonates in a burst of light. Silence follows, heavy and tense as they drift among the debris. Kael'ari's chest rises and falls. Rylan glances at the damage readout. A few systems are showing red, but they're still spaceworthy. For now, she sets the autopilot again, this time to a set of coordinates in deep space. He arches a brow, but she doesn't explain. Instead, she stands, letting out a shaky breath. He can see her arms trembling slightly, adrenaline still coursing through her. Without thinking, he stands too. They're close, closer than they've been in years, sweat and the tang of combat lingering around them. He hears his own heartbeat thudding. He wants to step away, keep that emotional distance, but she raises her eyes to his. The swirl of color in them has gone darker, the sign of an emotion she's not hiding well. Something primal roars in his blood. They almost died again, and the memory of how it felt to lose her is too vivid. He isn't gentle when he grabs her by the shoulders. She doesn't resist. Their mouths collide in a rough, hungry clash, fueled by anger and need. It's not a tender reunion. There's bitterness and a desperate edge in the press of their lips, as if neither can quite figure out if it's love or hate that drives them together. Her skin reacts to his touch, glowing hotter, brightening in a rush of shimmering energy. He can feel that subtle crackle, a reminder that she's not human. She lets out a low sound deep in her throat, something like a growl. It only fans the heat spiking through him. He pushes her back against the wall, hands sliding up her arms, feeling the tremor in her muscles. She grips the front of his shirt and drags him closer, breath ragged against his mouth. Every second is charged, as though any moment they might end up drawing weapons on each other again, but they don't. He slides his hand around her waist, just under the tear in her gown, his fingertips finding the bare skin beneath. It's smooth, impossibly warm, reacting to him like she's made of living starfire. She tilts her head back, eyes half-lidded, and he kisses her neck, teeth scraping lightly. She shudders, a quiet gasp escaping her parted lips. He hates how much he's missed this, missed her. They fought together, survived together, and once upon a time loved together. The bitterness is still there, fueling every frantic movement, but it can't override the need. Her fingers tangle in his hair, and he can feel her nails lightly scraping his scalp. It sends a pulse of heat straight to his core. They break apart for a moment, breathless, and she stares at him, eyes glinting with that alien ferocity he's always found irresistible. "You never forgave me," she says in a breathless whisper. He doesn't answer with words. Instead, he backs her up to the small bench built into the side of the cockpit. She sits, her posture still carrying that regal edge. But there's an undeniable desire in her parted lips, the flush of her cheeks. He sees her run her thumb over her lower lip again, an echo of old habits. Their breathing grows more uneven. He can't even remember the last time he felt such pent-up hunger, as though the years apart have ignited an unspeakable hunger that demands to be fed right now in the aftermath of mortal danger. She reaches out, grabs his wrist, and pulls him in so that he's standing between her legs. His pulse thunders. She kisses him again, harder this time, with a faint growl that vibrates against his lips. He feels the shift of her thighs around him, drawing him in, and the brush of her luminous skin sends a shock of sensation through him. He makes a low sound, pressing in closer until there's no space left between them. Her hands slide under his shirt, exploring the scars on his torso, tracing each ridge as though mapping the changes time has wrought. He exhales sharply, leaning into her, returning the favor by letting his palms wander along her waist and hips. The tear in her gown widens, revealing more of that inhumanly smooth skin. He's held back so much anger, so much longing, and it all detonates in this moment of reckless abandon. Their kisses deepen, tongues tangling in a battle for dominance neither wants to lose. He bites her lip gently, and she gasps, hooking her arms around his neck. She tastes like fire and memory, something that plunges him back into the time when they fought side by side in the dust of a war-torn planet. Only now they're older, more hardened, and possibly more desperate. He slides one hand behind her back, pulling her tighter against him, feeling the curve of her body press into his. She arches, her skin pulsing with faint luminescence that sends faint shadows dancing across the cockpit walls. The ship hums around them, and a distant alarm beeps for damaged systems, but neither of them cares in this frantic, heated blur. She reaches down, tugging impatiently at the belt that holds his gear. He watches her face, sees the ferocious desire etched in every line, and realizes he's never seen her so unguarded. There's no regal mask here, just raw want. It stirs something primal in him, a possessive streak that flares bright. They don't speak, because words are wasted. Every brush of lips, every hungry grasp, every ragged breath says more than conversation ever could. He feels her exhale against him as his hands slide along her sides, brushing over the edges of the gown that still clings to her shoulders. The fabric slips, bearing more of her smooth alien form. It's surreal to watch. The faint glow of her skin shift from that cool blue to a deeper, almost shimmering midnight hue, a reflection of her intensifying desire. Her nails dig lightly into his shoulders, pulling him closer until there's no sense of where he ends and she begins. They cling to each other in a haze of heated touches, letting the tension and frustration of years translate into something scorching and immediate. He can't even register the fleeting pain of her grip because it pales in comparison to the rush of pleasure coursing through him. His lips trace the line of her jaw, down the curve of her neck, reveling in the taste of her skin, the faint tang of salt, and something distinctly alien. She tilts her head back, eyes drifting shut, letting him explore. He hears her breath hitch when he finds a particularly sensitive spot. In response, she tugs his face back up to hers, capturing his mouth in another bruising kiss that leaves them both panting. Time stretches. They're lost in the electric pull between them, a desperation fueled by near-death combat and the memory of heartbreak. Her hands roam his body with frenzied intensity, relearning every scar and ridge. He groans into her mouth, half dizzy with need. The battered, war-hardened soldier in him wants to seize this moment, brand her with his desire just as she once marked his soul. Her voice trembles with emotion she's clearly struggling to contain. He's not sure if she's on the verge of tears or fury, but he knows she won't break. Kael'ari has always been steel wrapped in beauty, and the meltdown of that composure only heightens the staggering tension. They tumble into a deeper embrace, letting the swirl of color under her skin guide them. It's frantic, almost volatile, but beneath the ragged breathing and urgent touches lies something unspoken, the bond they used to share. It's battered by betrayal and separation, but it's still there, pulsing. She draws him closer, and he meets her halfway without hesitation. No thoughts other than the heat of her body and the taste of her on his tongue. In the afterglow of that fierce joining, they finally pull apart, breathing like they've run a marathon. She rests her forehead against his, eyes still half closed, her skin luminous in places where he touched her the most. Neither speaks. For a moment, the silence crowded with the unacknowledged truths they both carry. Eventually he steps back, heart slamming in his chest. She blinks, coming down from the haze. The tension lingers, an undercurrent that refuses to fade. But they both know they can't sink into it again right now. There's a mission, a threat. Rylan drags a hand over his face, inhaling slowly to calm his racing pulse. She stands on shaky legs, adjusting her gown the best she can, though the tear remains. He notices how she tries to regain that regal composure, lifting her chin. The flush on her cheeks betrays her. She lifts her gaze to his, and the swirl of color in her eyes has softened, but he can still see the lingering embers of hunger. "We should," he starts, voice husky. "We should get the ship to a safe dock. Repair what we can." She nods, running a hand through her hair, which has come loose in the chaos. "I know of a place. It's hidden from most commercial routes, a refuge I set up after I took the throne." She hesitates, looking as if she wants to say more about what just happened, but can't form the words. He gives a curt nod, unwilling to dig into the emotional fallout. That explosive encounter was a long time coming, but they don't have the luxury of dissecting it. Fine. Input the coordinates. She slips past him, their arms brushing for a split second, sending another jolt of awareness through him. He tries not to watch her too closely as she seats herself at the controls again, but it's impossible to ignore the curve of her spine, the lingering flush on her cheeks, and the memory of how her skin felt against his. He focuses on the readout in front of him, forcing his mind to shift back into combat readiness. Coordinates appear on the screen. He glances at them, noticing it's deep into her empire's territory, somewhere in a remote star system. He wonders how she's managed to keep a safe haven while her own court seems intent on ripping her from power. But she's always been cunning. The hum of the engines intensifies as the ship sets course for a distant point in the void. They slip into faster-than-light travel. For a few hours, neither speaks. He busies himself checking the hull damage, resecuring his gear, and making small repairs to the systems that were fried during the pursuit. She remains in the cockpit, sometimes fiddling with the controls, other times lost in thought. The silence is heavy, but not entirely uncomfortable. It's like they're both catching their breath after the storm that just consumed them. Eventually, he feels the deceleration as they near their destination. He makes his way back to the cockpit, leaning over her shoulder to check the scanner. A small planetoid appears on the screen, surrounded by swirling nebula clouds. It's beautiful in a harsh way, ringed by debris and cosmic dust. She guides the ship down through the atmosphere, and soon they're gliding over a rocky landscape, lit by a distant sun that casts everything in a pale glow. They come to a landing near what looks like a concealed hangar entrance built into a cliff face. He can see automated turrets tracking their descent but holding fire. The ship sets down with a gentle bump. He stands, nods to her. "Let's see if your refuge is as secure as you claim." She arches a brow. "You'll see." They disembark into a dry, cool air. The hangar is carved right out of the stone, steel doors overhead. A handful of figures step forward. Rylan tenses, hand hovering near his weapon, until Kael'ari gives a sign and they kneel. She's still queen here, apparently. They speak in hushed tones, addressing her with formal titles that make Rylan's teeth clench. She waves them off, telling them to repair the ship and guard the entrance. Then she leads Rylan deeper into a set of tunnels, illuminated by faint lights embedded in the walls. The passage is narrow, but the architecture is elegant. Carved reliefs of alien script decorate the stone. He wonders how long she's had this place. She stops at a door, guarded by two heavily armed sentinels. They bow and step aside. Inside, Rylan finds himself in a chamber that seems to serve as a makeshift command center. Holographic displays flicker with intel readouts, star maps, and tactical data. A long metal table stands at the center, and a dozen or so staff bustle around, all in subdued but respectful attire. When Kael'ari enters, they pause, bowing. She motions for them to continue, then leads Rylan to a quieter corner. "I've been planning for an uprising for some time," she admits, her voice low. "I knew factions within my court were dissatisfied with my decisions." He crosses his arms. Decisions like backing out of a war that would have brought you glory but risked countless innocent lives, or refusing to exploit your people for resources. He doesn't mean to sound impressed, but he is. She was always more than just a pretty face or a cold monarch. Part of what drew him to her was that sense of moral responsibility. She meets his eyes. "I did what I had to do, and it cost me. Now the conspirators want to seize the throne, throw the empire into expansionist wars, enslave weaker systems." Her gaze flickers with anger. "I can't let that happen." Rylan exhales. A part of him wants to remain cold, to remind her of her betrayal. But the mission hits his sense of justice. He's spent too many years fighting scum for credits, ignoring the bigger picture. Maybe this is his chance to do something that matters again, even if it means working with the woman who broke him. "How do we stop them?" he asks, keeping his voice neutral. She turns to one of the holographic displays, a swirling map of star systems. There's a key node of influence, a stronghold on Iskar Prime. It's where the conspirators coordinate. If we can strike it, sever their command structure, we'll force their hand. But I'll need infiltration, sabotage, possibly an assassination of their leadership. He glances at the map, noticing the heavy fortifications. That's suicide. Unless you have an inside man or some passcodes we can exploit. She presses her lips together. "I have some connections. A general who's still loyal, operating undercover. But we have to move fast. The conspirators are accelerating their plans, especially now that they've sent teams to kill me off-world." A bitter laugh escapes him. "So it's the two of us against an entire faction?" "Not just us," she says, gesturing to the staff in the command center. "I have an army of loyalists, but they're scattered across several systems, pinned down by conspirator forces. They can't unite under one banner until the conspirators lose their main hold on Iskar Prime." He studies the readouts, scanning for vulnerabilities. His mind churns with the possibilities. "We'll need a small team, hit them where it hurts. Disrupt communications, disable defenses, take out key targets. Then your loyalists can move in and clean up." Her eyes flash with admiration, that old spark he remembers. She rests a hand on the console, and the swirling color in her eyes shifts to a determined shade. "Yes, I knew you'd see the path forward." He doesn't respond to that. Instead, he sets his jaw. "Fine. Let's assemble a strike team. I'll need infiltration gear and maybe a secondary pilot if you're coming along." She lifts her chin. "I am coming. This is my fight." He has to suppress a surge of protectiveness, that old urge to keep her safe. "Just don't get yourself killed trying to play queen on the front lines." Her smile is grim. "I won't." She beckons someone over, likely an advisor or second in command. They begin relaying orders. Rylan listens to the conversation, gleaning that the staff here are seasoned, each specialized in different aspects: intelligence, logistics, medical. It's a small but formidable team. He steps away to give them space, letting his gaze wander around the cavernous command center. Memories of the earlier encounter in the cockpit swirl in his mind. His body still hums with the aftermath. He won't deny it was intense, raw, but it doesn't erase the betrayal. She was the one who walked away, even if she did it for what she thought was a noble reason. He feels her presence before he sees her, that subtle warmth. She comes up behind him, voice quiet. "We'll be heading out in less than a day. Is that enough time for you to prepare?" He gives a curt nod. "I don't need long. I'll go over the infiltration plan with your intel officer." She shifts, brushing an invisible speck of dust off her gown. It's torn and stained from the fight, but she still carries herself like royalty. He can't help but recall how she looked when she was pinned against the cockpit wall, breathless with desire. The memory ignites a flicker of heat he tries to tamp down. "Focus," he tells himself. He's about to speak when a man in uniform approaches, her commanding officer presumably. He salutes, then tells her that a group of scouts just reported in. The conspirators are already tightening security. On Iska Prime, expecting her next move. Rylan notes the tension in Kael'ari's posture. She dismisses the officer, turning back to him with a steely resolve. "We'll adapt," she says. "We have to." He nods. "We've faced worse odds." A memory surfaces of a time when they were pinned down by an entire battalion. They made it out barely, but only because they trusted each other with their lives. Now they have to do it again, only the stakes are higher, more personal. They spend the next hours locked in war. Council, going over infiltration routes, analyzing guard rotations, planning sabotage points. Rylan commandeers a corner of the command center, hacking into old networks to pull up schematics. Kael'ari confers with her loyalists, sending coded messages to gather them. When they finally wrap, Rylan is exhausted. He rubs his eyes and steps out of the command center into a quieter corridor. The overhead lights cast shadows on the stone walls. A faint hum suggests some kind of generator deeper in the complex. He wonders where he's supposed to sleep, if at all. He hears footsteps behind him. Kael'ari approaches, her expression thoughtful. "There's a chamber ready for you. It's Spartan, but you can rest." He nods, trying not to think about how easily they fell into a heated embrace mere hours ago. "Fine. Lead the way." They walk in silence down a branching hallway. The tension is almost worse now, thick and unresolved. He can still sense the aftershocks in the air, a chord of attraction and resentment that vibrates between them. She stops at a door, pressing a panel to open it. Inside is a small room with a single bed, dimly lit, no decorations aside from a storage chest. She lingers in the doorway. "You can sleep here. I'll be nearby if—" She trails off, looking unsure for the first time since they arrived. He doesn't step in yet. "If what?" Her throat works, and she lowers her gaze. "If you need me." It's such a loaded statement that he can't formulate a response. The memory of her body against his is too fresh, too vivid. Instead of speaking, he just gives a curt nod and enters the room. The door slides shut behind him, leaving him in darkness. He stands there, muscles tense, thoughts warring. He half expects her to follow, but she doesn't. He has no idea whether that's a relief or a disappointment. Sleep is fitful when it comes. He's haunted by dreams of old battles, of her face turned away from him as she ascended to the throne. Then it shifts to the moment in the cockpit, the heat of their limbs entwined, the taste of her name on his lips. He wakes in a sweat, cursing under his breath. He sits up, body sore from stress and unrelenting tension. There's no point trying to sleep more, so he stands and dresses, strapping on his weapons. The infiltration is set for later, but he wants to check the final details. He heads back to the command center, expecting to find it empty. Instead, he sees her there, bent over a console, hair loose around her shoulders, the tear in her gown now stitched with a rough patch. She notices him enter and straightens. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asks, her voice subdued. He shakes his head. "No." She gestures at the holo display. "I've been rechecking the entry points on Iskar Prime. Security is tighter. Then I realized. He takes in the data, letting his soldier's mind pass it. We can still do it. We'll just have to be quieter, faster, and if all else fails, we improvise. She nods, her gaze lingering on him. He senses she wants to say something. Finally, she does. I'm sorry for how I handled it all those years ago. He goes still, not expecting the apology. It doesn't change anything. I know, she whispers, but I need you to understand. If I hadn't stepped up as queen, the empire would have fallen into chaos even sooner. Millions could have died. I had to. He cuts her off. I get it. Duty, sacrifice. You always said you'd do anything to protect your people, but it didn't make it hurt less. Her luminous skin flickers with a muted glow, as if reflecting her turmoil. And now I might lose it all anyway. He takes a step closer, arms still folded. Not if I have any say in it. She exhales softly. In that moment, they share a fragile, unspoken acceptance that the past can't be undone. But maybe this mission offers a chance to forge something new, if they survive. Time slips by in final preparations, checking gear, loading weapons, making sure the infiltration team is ready. Rylan meets the small squad they'll be taking, 3 alien fighters loyal to Kael'ari, each with a specialized skill. They're efficient, respectful, but a little wary of him, probably because he's human and a known rogue operative. When the moment arrives, the group boards a sleek, black-painted transport that blends seamlessly with the darkness of space. Kael'ari pilots them out of the hidden hangar. Rylan sits at her side, scanning the nav systems. He notices her fingers trembling once as she grasps the throttle. She's nervous, and he can't blame her. They jump into faster-than-light travel, heading toward Iskar Prime. The plan is to drop out of FTL, near the outskirts of the system, slip in under the nose of the conspirators' blockade, land near their fortress, and set off a chain reaction of sabotage. Rylan checks his weapons meticulously, a pair of pistols, a collapsible rifle, and a set of knives. He notices Kael'ari's choice of armament, sleek energy pistols that match her fluid fighting style. They slip out of FTL. The distant sun of the Iskar system shines on the horizon. Sensors show multiple enemy ships patrolling. Kael'ari's brow furrows in concentration. Rylan admires her skill as she maneuvers them carefully, using the shadow of a barren moon to mask their approach. Their small transport passes undetected, weaving through blind spots until the fortress looms below. It's an imposing structure, built into the side of a rocky canyon, heavily fortified. Anti-air batteries stud the walls, scanning the skies with searchlights. She lands them in a ravine, hidden from immediate sight. The team disembarks. Rylan feels the rush of adrenaline. He can see the fortress towers in the distance, rising against a crimson sky. The wind kicks up dust and grit, biting at his cheeks. Kael'ari stands beside him, luminous skin taking on the dusty hue of the environment. "Move out," he says quietly to the team. They nod, following his lead. She casts one last glance at the transport, then falls in step behind him, a silent sentinel at his back. They sneak through the canyon, hugging the shadows of the rock face. Occasional spotlights sweep overhead, but they manage to stay out of sight. The tension is palpable. One slip, and the entire fortress will know they're here. Rylan's senses are hyper-focused, every muscle taut. Eventually, they reach a hidden service tunnel that Kael'ari's intel indicated. One of her fighters sets to work on the security pad while the rest of them keep watch. When the door slides open with a hiss, they slip inside, hearts pounding. The corridor is dimly lit, cables running along the ceiling. The plan calls for them to place charges in several key locations to disrupt power grids and communications. The group splits up, each pair heading to a target zone. Kael'ari chooses to remain with Rylan. He wonders if it's because she doesn't trust him, or if it's something else. Either way, he doesn't argue. They move deeper into the fortress. Creeping past patrols, Rylan can sense the tension in Kael'ari's every movement, the silent swirl of color in her eyes whenever they almost get spotted. In one corridor, they're forced to press themselves behind a row of metal crates as a squad of guards marches by. Rylan hears Kael'ari's breath catch, feels the heat of her body pressed to his side. Even in this dire moment, the memory of their embrace sends sparks through him. He keeps himself focused, waiting until the guards move on before he signals her to proceed. They reach a small power junction. Rylan sets the charges quickly, wires them to the remote detonator, and steps back. Kael'ari nods, and they move, on footsteps echoing in the silent halls. Each door they open could reveal an entire garrison, but they press forward. Eventually, they find themselves in a large chamber filled with humming generators. Kael'ari's eyes narrow. This must be the main power distribution center, a prime target to cripple the fortress. He places the rest of his charges. She stands, guard, scanning for threats. Moments later, footsteps approach. They duck behind a console just as a group of armed conspirators enters, talking in hushed voices about the Queen's rumored survival. Rylan can practically feel the rage vibrating through Kael'ari at their words, but she stays silent. He can't help but notice how her skin darkens with the intensity of her emotion. When the soldiers pass, Rylan stands, but one guard whips around at the last second, eyes going wide. The alarm is immediate, a shout, the crackle of weapons. Rylan dives, rolling behind a generator as bolts of energy streak by. Kael'ari opens fire with both pistols, her posture a dancer's pivot as she cuts down two men. Rylan leaps up, unloading bullets into a third. The heavy roar of firearms in enclosed space sends adrenaline spiking through him. More enemies flood in. They must have triggered some silent alarm or been spotted by a camera. Rylan ducks behind a console, exchanging gunfire. Kael'ari flips behind a metal beam, her luminous skin reflecting muzzle flashes. She blasts an attacker, then another. They're outnumbered, but the two of them fight like a well-oiled machine. He cracks a grin, despite the chaos, remembering how good they were together on the battlefield. A stray shot hits a control panel and sparks fly. The lights flicker. Rylan presses the detonator for the charges on the far side of the fortress. A deep rumble shakes the ground. The power distribution console shudders. The place starts to go dark in sections. Explosions rock distant hallways. The fortress is under siege from within. "Time to go," he shouts. Kael'ari nods, finishing off the last soldier in the room with a precise shot. They sprint through the confusion, alarms blaring, red emergency lights strobing. They meet up with one of their squad members, who signals that the communications in tower is destroyed. Perfect. They need to exit before the entire garrison regroups. Kael'ari leads him down a corridor that slopes upward toward a landing bay on the fortress's roof. If they can reach it, a loyalist dropship is supposed to rendezvous, but the conspirators aren't giving up easily. An entire team of heavily armored soldiers blocks the way. There's no time to find another route. Rylan draws a knife, eyes blazing. "Stay behind me." He rushes forward, weaving between bursts of gunfire. His knife plunges into a soldier's throat. Kael'ari fires over his shoulder, dropping two more. The hallway is a massacre of shouts and muzzle flashes. Rylan slams into another armored foe, struggling to break through. Kael'ari snarls, unleashing a surge of that crackling alien energy that blasts a path forward. They burst onto the rooftop. Wind whips at their clothes, and the sky is a turbulent sea of smoke and swirling clouds. A sleek gunship swoops in low. Kael'ari's loyalists wave them aboard, covering them with suppressive fire. As soon as Rylan and Kael'ari scramble into the hold, the ship rockets into the stormy sky, leaving the burning fortress below. Inside, the rest of the infiltration team gathers, battered but alive. A wave of relief washes over Rylan as he finally catches his breath. Kael'ari leans against the gunship's wall, eyes closed for a moment, letting the adrenaline settle. The swirl of color in her skin is chaotic, shifting between victory and exhaustion. They look at each other, remembering how close they came to death again. He wants to say something, but the pilot shouts from the cockpit, "Enemy craft inbound." The fortress may be crippled, but the conspirators are sending their air patrols to intercept. Kael'ari curses softly and braces for another fight. The gunship banks hard, and Rylan grabs a mounted turret, taking aim at the incoming fighters. Explosions rock the gunship's shields. Kael'ari stands beside him, eyes flashing, her voice fierce as she orders the pilot to climb higher. Rylan fires off rounds, forcing the pursuing ships to dodge. One loyalist in the seat behind them manipulates the shield generator, trying to keep them alive. Bolts of energy lance around them, turning the sky into a firefight. Despite the chaos, Rylan feels a surge of exhilaration. He's always lived for these moments, life or death on a razor's edge. Kael'ari's presence magnifies it, igniting a primal spark in his blood. He squeezes the turret's trigger, shredding one of the enemy fighters, watching it spiral downward in flames. The other breaks off, but the pilot warns they're losing shield power fast. A bright blast sears the gunship's left engine. Sparks fly, and the cabin lurches violently. Smoke pours in. Kael'ari grips a support strut, shouting for the pilot to hold course. Another enemy craft lines up for a kill shot. Rylan grits his teeth, swinging the turret around. He fires desperately, but the fighter ducks away, then reappears at their flank. The pilot curses, weaving, but it's not enough. Suddenly, a volley of missiles streaks from below, slamming into the pursuer. The enemy craft explodes in a burst of flaming debris. Rylan cranes his neck to see where the missiles came from. Another loyalist squadron, newly arrived in the sky, diving in to provide cover. Kael'ari exhales, relief etched in her face. Their reinforcements arrive just in time. Supported by the friendly ships, they limp away from Iskar Prime's fortress, bounding into the upper atmosphere, eventually making the jump to FTL once they're clear. Only then do they collapse. Against the bulkhead, sweat slicking their brows. The infiltration was a success, the conspirators' stronghold crippled. Now, her loyalist forces can move in, and the enemy's grip on the Empire will begin to loosen. In the cramped confines of the gunship, leaning on a bench, Rylan glances over to Kael'ari. Their eyes meet. He sees both triumph and a lingering spark of desire. She's alive, he's alive. The mission is on track, but there's no telling how many battles remain before this war is ended. She lowers her gaze, and he catches the slight quiver in her fingers. She's wound tight, body still thrumming with adrenaline. He can relate. Later, when they dock at a safe harbor, the rest of the team disperses for debriefing and medical checks. Rylan and Kael'ari find themselves alone, in a secluded area of the base, a corridor leading to the command quarters. She gestures for him to follow. He does, footsteps echoing on the metal deck. Once the door slides shut behind them, the tension coiled inside them snaps. They practically collide in a rush of tangled limbs and urgent mouths, feeding off the near-death high. He can taste the sweat and dust on her lips. She presses him against the wall, her body aflame. His scars protest at the rough contact, but he doesn't care. Her breath comes in ragged gasps as he drags his fingers through, her hair tipping her head back to expose her neck. His lips trace the rapid pulse there, eliciting a low moan that sets his nerves on fire. She tears at his gear straps, impatient. He responds in kind, unfastening the remains of her torn uniform. There's nothing gentle about it. Both of them are desperate, aware that any moment could be the last calm they get before the next fight. They crash onto a narrow bunk in the corner of the room. Hands roam, nails scrape, bodies collide. It's a frenzied struggle for dominance and closeness all at once. Her alien skin surges with waves of color, responding to his every touch. He can't hold back the groan that escapes him when she wraps her legs around his waist, pulling him in. Everything about her is a heady mix of violence and allure, of resentment and need. The bunk rattles under their combined weight. He runs his hands along her sides, feeling the flex of her muscles. She arches beneath him, whispering something in the language he doesn't understand, the syllables purring. Her eyes lock on his, half-lidded, swirling with that hypnotic luminescence. He captures her mouth in a hungry kiss, losing himself in the taste of her. In that heated moment, there's no empire, no conspirators, no betrayal, just raw chemistry between two warriors shaped by conflict. Their bodies align, finding a desperate rhythm. His scars burn with the memory of battles, but her warmth pushes away every ache. She clutches his shoulders, a snarl on her lips that dissolves into a gasp of pleasure. He feels the surge of her alien aura against his skin, like static electricity, intensifying every sensation. Time blurs. They cling to each other through waves of fierce passion, teeth sinking into lips, nails digging into skin, drawing out muffled cries. It's not gentle, nor do they want it to be. It's the culmination of years of tension and a second chance they're not sure they deserve. Finally, the frenzy crescendos, leaving them trembling, tangled in each other's arms, sweat-soaked and breathless. In the aftermath, they lie side by side, skin cooling. Her body still glows faintly, tendrils of luminous color receding. He's silent, unsure what words can possibly fit. She rests a hand on his chest, fingers splayed over. An old scar. Her touch is delicate now, a stark contrast to the ferocity of moments before. They listen to each other's breathing. "We're insane," he finally mutters. She exhales a short, humorless laugh. "Probably," she says softly, "a console." Chime breaks the quiet. They stiffen, the reality of their situation crashing back in. There's a war to win, an empire in need of saving. He draws away, sitting up on the edge of the bunk, running a hand through his hair. She does the same, eyes flicking to the door, the color of her skin returning to a calmer shade. "I should—" he starts, standing. She nods, swallowing. Whatever protest might linger. They reassemble their gear in silence, a tangible sense of finality creeping in. Another battle awaits, another council meeting. The conspirators might be reeling from the blow, but they won't stay down long. This is just the beginning of a larger conflict. He can't dwell on the fact that it might mean more moments like this, stolen between firefights, or that it could mean losing her again. They open the door. The corridor is quiet except for the distant hum of power generators. He glances at her, uncertain if he should say anything about what just transpired. But before he can decide, one of her advisors rushes in, breathless. He says the conspirators' forces are regrouping at the edge of the system, planning a counterattack. Her loyalists are en route, but they need the Queen to coordinate. She stiffens, regal composure snapping back into place. "I'll be right there." The advisor scurries off. She turns to Rylan, scanning his face. For a fleeting moment, her eyes soften. He gives her a tiny nod. They head down the corridor together, both still smelling of sweat and gunpowder, their bodies bearing fresh marks from combat and each other, yet neither complains. They thrive in this crucible. At the command center, it's chaos. Officers shout orders, screens flash with data. Word spreads that the fortress infiltration was a success, but new threats loom. Rylan stands with Kael'ari, listening to reports of the conspirators massing dreadnoughts at the system's edge. They plan to retake Iskar Prime or die trying, which could lead to a catastrophic battle for the local populace. He leans over the tactical map. They'll go for a show of force. If we stand toe-to-toe, we'll lose a lot of people. We need a strategic edge. She studies the data, brow knitted. We could rally our supporters, lure the enemy into an ambush, but we need them to commit. Rylan's gaze flicks to a set of orbital platforms that appear on the display. controlled by loyalists. If we can draw the conspirators' fleet past these platforms, we can trap them in a crossfire. But someone has to be the bait. A silence falls. Everyone looks to Kael'ari. She presses her lips together. I'll lead the main fleet. They won't expect me to risk myself so openly. Rylan's blood chills. That's too dangerous. She lifts her gaze to his, a quiet defiance there. You think I'm not willing to stand on the front lines for my empire? He can't argue. This is the queen who gave up everything, including him, to protect her people. She won't hide. Behind her loyalists, he just hates the risk. But he knows they have little choice. If Kael'ari takes her flagship into the fray, the conspirators will commit their forces, certain they can end her once and for all. Then the loyalist orbital platforms can close the net. Fine, he concedes, but I'm going with you. She inclines her head, and a faint smile touches her lips. They move to the docking bay, assembling an armada of starships from the loyalist forces. It's a ragtag fleet of different classes, some battered, some fresh off production lines, but each one loyal. Rylan boards Kael'ari's flagship, a massive vessel bristling with cannons, flanked by cruisers and fighters. From the bridge, they watch as the ships form up in tight formation, ready to jump to the system's edge. Kael'ari stands at the command console, posture rigid, that same luminous aura shimmering. Rylan stands near her, arms folded, scanning the star charts. The tension in the air is palpable, every crew member focused on the upcoming engagement. She gives the order. The fleet leaps into FTL, swirling lights enveloping them, then emerging near the designated coordinates. Immediately, sensors pick up the conspirators' dreadnoughts, an imposing blockade. They bristle with deadly weaponry. Kael'ari takes a steady breath. Rylan can see her throat tighten. This could be the fight that determines the Empire's fate. The conspirators waste no time. They open fire, beams of energy lancing out across the void. Kael'ari's flagship returns, salvo after salvo, fighters buzzing around like hornets. Explosions blossom on both sides. The vacuum of space flashes with lethal beauty. Rylan holds onto a railing as the ship shudders from impacts. Technicians scramble to maintain shields. She remains calm, issuing orders in that commanding tone that resonates through the loudspeakers. Her captains respond with unwavering loyalty. But the dreadnoughts press in, numbers overwhelming. Rylan sees an enemy broadside tear through one of their cruisers, leaving it drifting, air leaking from shattered hull segments. Fury rips through him, fueled by the knowledge that these conspirators would happily enslave or destroy entire worlds if they seize power. He steps to Kael'ari's side. We need to feign retreat. She nods, voice steady. All ships fall back on Vector 3. Make it look real. Give them an opening. The loyalist vessels turn, thrusters blazing. The conspirators sense weakness and press forward, their dreadnoughts lumbering. Now they're in the kill zone. Kael'ari's eyes flick to Rylan. He gives her a grim smile, then nods for her to trigger the next phase. She activates the comm to the orbital platforms. With a single code, hidden station cannons pivot, unleashing a barrage of plasma beams into the conspirators' flank. The dreadnoughts reel, shields flickering. At that moment, the loyalists turn back, hammering the conspirators from the front. The crossfire is brutal. Rylan watches the enemy ships break formation, some exploding in blinding bursts. Others try to retreat, but the loyalists pursue. It's a full-scale engagement, and the conspirators are trapped. He glimpses smaller vessels jettisoning escape pods, hoping for mercy. Kael'ari calmly orders her forces to accept surrenders and disable those still resisting. Her posture is unyielding, but he sees relief in her eyes. When the last dreadnought is neutralized, the loyalist fleet holds position, battered but triumphant. Rylan glances around the bridge. Cheering erupts from several crew stations. Kael'ari sags against the console for a moment, exhaling. Rylan steps closer, placing a steadying hand on her arm. She meets his gaze, and though she's exhausted, her eyes shine. They've won a critical victory. The conspirators' main fleet is broken, their fortress on Iskar Prime crippled. Reports come in that rebellious forces across the Empire are surrendering or melting away. Loyalist armies reclaim vital systems. Soon the Empire will be whole again under her rule, but there's one last thread to tie up. Her intelligence has located the chief conspirator, the mastermind behind the coup. He's holed up in a hidden bunker on a distant planet. Kael'ari insists on going personally to finalize things. Rylan doesn't argue. They gather a small strike team, board a shuttle, and make for the bunker while the main fleet attends to cleanup operations. The bunker is set into a mountainous region under thick cloud cover. Anti-air defenses force them to land at the base of the range. They trudge up steep cliffs, battling frigid winds and the occasional automated turret. Rylan leads the way, shoulders tense, scanning the terrain. Kael'ari follows close, her breath visible in the chill air. The rest of the team fans out, covering flanks. When they breach the bunker door, they face minimal resistance, just a handful of desperate guards. Rylan subdues them without mercy. Kael'ari's eyes glow fiercely, her steps sure. They move into a central chamber where the conspirator, a gaunt alien in ornate robes, stands trembling. He spews curses at Kael'ari, blaming her for weakening the Empire with her refusal to conquer the galaxy. She listens with cold resolve, not rising to his bait. Rylan levels his weapon at the conspirator's head. Last chance, surrender. The conspirator snarls, hitting a hidden button. A sonic blast erupts, staggering the team. Kael'ari hisses in pain, her sensitive ears assaulted by the screech. Rylan's vision blurs, but he forces himself to stay upright, returning fire. The conspirator tries to flee, but Kael'ari recovers in time, using that crackling energy to disable him. He collapses to his knees, howling. She stands over him, eyes glinting. "You sought to tear my empire apart. You lost." The conspirator spits at her feet. "You're weak. You'd rather bed foreign scum than see your people reign supreme." Rylan bristles, stepping forward, but Kael'ari stops him with a raised hand. She looks down at the conspirator with an imperious calm that only a monarch can muster. "My empire is stronger for valuing life. You will face justice." With that, she signals the team to restrain him. The conspirator howls indignantly. But it's over. The last piece of the puzzle falls into place. Outside, the wind is still howling when they emerge. Rylan breathes in the crisp air. Relief surges through him, mingled with a sense of finality. For the first time in a long while, Kael'ari's empire stands on solid ground, no longer threatened by internal strife. The Queen has reasserted her dominion. The cost has been high, but it's a new dawn. They descend the mountain, escorting the conspirator in chains. At the shuttle, a wave of loyalist soldiers greets them with cheers. Kael'ari stands tall, glancing at Rylan. He meets her gaze. He can see gratitude there, mixed with something else, an unspoken question about where they go from here. The flight back is quiet, the conspirator under guard in the rear. Rylan sits beside Kael'ari, watching the sunset colors streak across the sky. Eventually, he murmurs, "You did it." She nods, slowly. "We did it." Her hand brushes his. A delicate gesture. He turns his palm upward, linking his fingers with hers. It's a subtle show of connection, one that neither tries to deny now. When they land at the restored capital city, it's a scene of jubilant relief. Crowds gather, cheering the Queen's name. She must present the captured conspirator for trial. She glances at Rylan before disembarking, a myriad of emotions playing on her face. He inclines his head in silent support, stepping out after her. The city is battered from the conflict, but hope shines in the faces of her people. She ascends the palace steps, guards flanking her, the conspirator dragged behind. Rylan keeps a vigilant eye on the crowd, ready for any last-minute betrayal, but none comes. Kael'ari addresses the throng, voice echoing through amplified speakers. She affirms her commitment to lead with justice, not conquest. And the crowd roars approval. Rylan stands off to the side, arms folded, watching her reclaim the throne she nearly lost. After the speech, she dismisses the guards, ordering them to secure the conspirator in the palace dungeons. Night falls, and the city's lights glow across the skyline. Rylan lingers in a grand hall while court officials swarm Kael'ari, pressing her for details and future plans. Eventually she frees herself from their demands and crosses to where he waits near a towering marble pillar. Her gown is tattered, her hair tousled by the wind, and her skin bears faint bruises from battle. Yet she's never looked more alive. She steps close, searching his eyes for some sign of acceptance or rejection. He doesn't move away. Their hands find each other, fingers interlocking. He speaks softly. "So what happens now?" She studies him, lips curving in a near smile. "Now, I rebuild. There's a lot of healing to do for the Empire, too many wounds left by the conspirators. My people need a strong leader." He senses the weight of her duty, the burden that once took her from him. "You'll be busy," he says, voice tight. "With meaning?" She nods. "Yes, and I can't ask you to stay. You've been tied down by my choices before." He lifts her chin with a gentle touch, compelled by the memory of how they clung to each other in the cockpit, in that corridor. "You might not have to ask. I'm tired of running missions for people who don't give a damn about doing the right thing. You do, even if it drove a wedge between us once." Her gaze brightens with a swirl of color. "You'd stay? Here with me?" He exhales. "I'm not promising we won't fight. Hell, we'll probably rip each other's heads off, but we both know where that anger leads." He smirks softly. "You need someone who can protect your blind spots. I'm good at that." Her eyes flash, a faint grin tugging at her lips. "You're infuriating." Likewise. They stand in that grand hall, the chaos of victory swirling outside. But for a moment, they're just two warriors who found their way back. He slides, a hand around her waist, drawing her close. She leans into him, tipping her face up. The kiss they share is less desperate, but no less intense. It's a promise, sealed in the heart of a kingdom reborn. The city lights glow beyond the palace doors, illuminating the scars left by the war. Repairs will take time, but the conspirators are finished, and the throne stands secure under her rule. Rylan holds her tight, breath mingling with hers in the hush of the corridor. If anyone passes, they have the decency to remain silent, allowing their queen this moment of private triumph. She breaks the kiss, pressing her forehead to his. "I chose duty once, and it cost me. Now if I have to choose again, I choose you." He closes his eyes, remembering all the anger, all the longing, the battles they've survived. His voice is a low rumble. "Then we'll make it work." They linger there, soaking in the reprieve. Outside, the Empire is stirring with new life, a future shaped by hard-won battles and an unbreakable bond. Eventually, she pulls away, a queen's composure slipping back into place. But her gaze remains warm, fixed on him. He takes her hand. Together, they walk toward the throne chamber, ready to face whatever challenges come next, side by side, no longer bound by the past, but forging a dangerous, exhilarating future together.